Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Quantum Spirituality on DreamVision7RadioNetwork.com, the show where past spiritual wisdom and present-day science merge to show us our future. Your host is Peter Canova, author of the 25-time award-winning book series, The First Souls Trilogy, available on Amazon, and Peter's website, petercanova.com. That's PeterCanova.com. This show is a live video, so if you're only listening and want to watch, go to Peter's website, petercanova.com. PeterCanova.com, where you can access his Facebook page to leave comments or questions, and click the D7RN link where you can receive a free gift video.
Hello, everybody. This is Peter Canova with you for another episode of Quantum Spirituality, the show where the past and present meet to tell us about our future. And today we have a very interesting guest. We're continuing our periodic discussions on the topic of UFOs, or I guess they're called UAPs, unidentified phenomena, but we're going to just use the term UFO because I think more people are familiar with that. And of course, you're listening to us on Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. And you can go to my website if you want, where you can get a live link, because you can listen either audio or video. We are a video program, international video program. So you can go to my link at petercanova.com. That's PeterCanova.com. And you'll see a page for Dream Vision 7 Radio. When you click on that, it will bring you to a screen where you can hit the live button and watch us in video. So today, our guest is Kevin D. Randle, who is a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel who served as a helicopter pilot, an aircraft commander in Vietnam, and an intelligence officer in Iraq. Kevin's Vietnam experiences can be seen at vietnamgroundzero.blogspot.com. So that's vietnamgroundzero, one word, .blogspot.com. I suggest you check that site out. And Kevin is one of the most respected researchers in the UFO field. He's actively investigated cattle mutilations, abductions, crash retrievals, and a wide variety of flying saucer sightings, interviewing high-profile researchers and hundreds of witnesses to UFO events. And he was among the first people to review the Project Blue Book files after they were declassified. And he saw them before some of the names had been redacted. And Colonel Randle has appeared in dozens of documentaries about UFOs and written dozens of books on the topic, including the recently published UFOs and the Deep State and Leveland about the sightings in Texas in November 1957. His blog, A Different Perspective, provides insights into some of the most controversial and some of the best UFO sightings. And his radio show podcast airs weekly on the X Zone Broadcast Network. And he also provides a short weekly segment about UFOs on Coast to Coast AM, a program which I have appeared on myself several times with George Noory. Well, first of all, Kevin, let me thank you for your service. I'm sure our audience appreciates that. And I guess I'd like to start off by asking you, how did you first get involved in UFO phenomena? What got you into this whole line of investigation?
I blame my mother. She had an interest in science fiction, and science fiction, of course, deals with alien visitation and alien interstellar flight and alien civilizations. In fact, she took me to the movie Earth versus the Flying Saucer when I was a little kid. So I kind of got the interest at that point, and from there I began looking at it because UFOs deal with alien visitation and alien civilizations, and it became an interest of mine as well. So I moved, I guess, the movie interest and the science fiction interest into the realm of the UFO.
Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, as a military person, you're part of the greater government. When did you first believe that there was more to this UFO phenomenon than the government might be revealing? When did you kind of arrive at that conclusion? Or I think you did arrive at that conclusion, but when did that happen?
I think that it's one of these things where I've moved to that conclusion, moved away from that conclusion, moved back to that conclusion, and that sort of thing, depending on the evidence and what I was looking at. As a teenager, I was reading the books on UFOs, and those are mostly done by the believers. So there's a bias built in there. But I looked at some of the skeptical work as well. And you look at, well, the Air Force said this, and you kind of believe the Air Force was doing a good job of the investigation and they're explaining all the sightings. Once I had an opportunity to look at the Project Blue Book files when they were first declassified and put into a more or less public arena in 1976, I came to the conclusion that an awful lot of the investigations had been poorly executed, incompetently executed, had been executed from a point of view of covering the whole thing up and diverting attention away from UFOs. And there was a lot of very good information in the Project Blue Book files that we as civilians hadn't had access to until they were declassified. And having now that access, we could see exactly what was going on and seeing the contradictions in the file conclusions. For example, and I'll just use Levelland as the best example. Here's a group of sightings around Levelland, Texas in November of 1957. Witnesses at 14 separate locations independently are reporting this phenomenon to the sheriff in a period of about 2.5 hours. The Air Force explanation was ball lightning. Well, in 1957, ball lightning was a very controversial topic, and scientists weren't even sure that it existed. We move into today, there's still controversy about whether or not ball lightning exists, but ball lightning, when it's described as something that may be 18 inches to 24 inches, 1.5 to 2 feet in diameter and very short-lived. You don't get it showing up in multiple locations, stalling cars, interacting with the environment in the ways that were manifested in Levelland. So you look at the files, and you realize that the conclusions being drawn based on the evidence that they themselves had collected is probably not accurate.
Well,
so
let me just ask you, I want to zero in on Levelland in a minute, but it seems the government knows something is out there. Now, is it that they're unsure what it is, or do they perhaps know more than what they're letting on? What's your feeling about their level of knowledge of this phenomenon?
If we look at the history, the modern history of UFOs, beginning with the Foo Fighters in World War II, there was a project, a highly classified project, to discover what they were, because the fear was it was some kind of an access aircraft that would sweep the Allied airplanes from the sky and change the balance of power in World War II. But when the war ended, nobody cared what they were. We had Scandinavian ghost rockets in 1946, but the Scandinavians, especially the Swedish government, began to suppress the information, and that sort of died out. We get to 1947 and the first good sightings, reported sightings here in the United States. And according to Ed Ruppelt, who was one time the chief of Project Blue Book, saying in the summer of 1947, the Pentagon was in a panic. They didn't know what was going on. I think on July 8th, 1947, they announced they had a flying saucer. I think at that point they understood what was going on, but the ramifications were such that they didn't want the public involved in it. So
was that Roswell you're referring to when you say they had a flying saucer?
Absolutely. The Roswell crash took place because they announced on July 8th that they had a flying saucer. And on July 9th, we suddenly read in the newspapers that the Army and the Navy is suppressing the stories of flying saucers whizzing through the atmosphere. So they've changed the dynamic there. Mm-hmm. So I think what we have is a group of people at the highest levels of government, a very, very small number of people in today's environment who know exactly what's going on, but they know what it is. And they're keeping that from us. And I think it's to protect their positions of power and their financial interests in what's going on.
Well, now let me explore that for a minute, Kel, because this is really interesting. Let me ask you a couple of questions in this regard. The original motivation. Okay, let's go back into the earlier days. Like let's go back to 1947, for instance, in the Roswell incident. There was a lot of contradictory stuff going on. You're right. They first said it was a flying saucer, then it was a weather balloon, so forth and so on. Now, would the motivation for covering up at that time have been that they were just in a panic and they thought that this could be Russian or something like that, and we had no answer for it, so they didn't want to, they didn't want to let on what they had? Or do you feel that, maybe even at that point, they knew that it was something not of this earth? Do you have any insight on that?
I believe when they first recovered the materials in Roswell, there was a lot of discussion about exactly what it was. I think the original fear, especially with the other sightings around the country, was that it was some kind of spy craft from our competitors. It was something going on with our competitors in the world at the time, and they had to figure out what it was and how they could counteract that threat. So I think that makes somewhat sense. When they were confronted with the information of Roswell, they suddenly realized that it may not be Soviet. It may not be our competitors in this world, because clearly what they had recovered was not from this earth. Jesse Marcel, who was the air intelligence officer in Roswell in 1947, said repeatedly what they picked up was nothing that had been manufactured on Earth. I think at that point, the dynamic changed. But the information was held at such a high level because, once again, what are the motivations of these alien creatures if they are in fact here? Is it hostility? Are they benign? Are they observers? What's going on? They didn't know. I think as time passed, they realized that there was no invasion fleet standing off waiting to attack, and they relaxed somewhat and tried to keep the information under wraps, because if we can solve the mysteries of what was covered at Roswell, then we take a major step beyond our competitors in the world, because the craft is obviously something that can operate in interstellar environments, and the technology would be something that we could incorporate into our weapon systems and our defensive systems as well. So I think that was part of the motivation originally, but I don't think they've solved it at this point. I think they're still kind of confused.
Are there any other recorded incidences of recoveries like Roswell in other countries?
I think the one recovery that I'm aware of that we can look at and say this is probably alien is the Roswell case would be there was the Shag Harbor incident in 1968, I believe it was, in Canada, where the thing was seen falling into the water. But I think that is more of a emergency landing, because the craft was not recovered by anybody, and it apparently left the area under its own power underwater and then took off. There are suggestions of things going on in other countries that are extremely mysterious, but I don't think they have the same kind of impact, pun intended, of the Roswell crash. I think it's more, we have the Rendlesham Forest, for example, which is a series of sightings in 1980 involving American airmen, but in England, where the event took place over a period of 3 or 4 days. And I think those are the kind of things we see in other countries. I think the crash of the UFOs are extremely rare. You have to wonder that they can travel interstellar distances. They figured out the technology to do that. And the first thing they do is crash one here by mistake, I think. But you have to wonder if that was a kind of a unique experience, or is there other instances in other countries where they may have recovered parts of a craft or that sort of thing. I have no knowledge of that. I'm speculating here. I know that what happened with Roswell, and I've seen reports of other things in other countries, but a lot of that is very suspicious. And I say that because it's in a foreign country and we don't have good access to an awful lot of the data there. But oftentimes it's a single witness who'd seen something, or it kind of morphs out of an environment where we cannot vet the information for its reliability. And Roswell kind of is different than that, because we have literally dozens of witnesses, and we have limited documentation, and we have the reaction of the government and that sort of thing. We can look at all of that kind of thing with Roswell, and we don't have the ability to look at that sort of thing in other countries. And I think if other countries had recovered a craft, the Australians, for example, in the 60s or 70s, I forget the date, decided they were going to investigate the UFOs. And the first thing they did was they contacted the United States Air Force, to what you have. And they talked about some of the materials that Don Kehoe had published in his books about flying saucers from outer space, or flying saucers are real, and that sort of thing. And the Air Force said, you can't believe anything that Kehoe said. He's making the stuff up. Turns out Kehoe was right 90% of the time, but it convinced the Australians there was nothing to it. And you would think if the Australians had recovered a craft or something like that, their reactions would have been somewhat different than, querying the United States Air Force. What do you guys know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have to look at that whole thing to kind of understand the worldwide phenomenon.
Well, now getting into the, I'm just interested to pursue the evolution of the government cover-up. So it started off that perhaps, they were just baffled and worried that it was a competitive earthly power that was, generating these aircraft. And then perhaps at Roswell, the paradigm shifted a little bit where they started to feel, well, it doesn't look like they're from here. Now, what is the motivation in this day and age? I mean, we're, what Roswell was, we're what, 70 years, whatever, ago. I mean, what is the motivation at this point in history of the government to keep on covering up the reality of UFO phenomena? I mean, you mentioned something about financial interest and so forth, which I wasn't quite sure where what you meant by that. But what are the motivations, for government to continue a cover up when more and more people, I think, if you survey them, they believe in this and they think that something's going on. Of course, it doesn't really reflect very well on the government when the public thinks, well, you guys are, putting something under the rug that we really have a right to know about. What is the motivation now for the continued cover up of this?
Had you asked me that question 3 or 4 years ago, I wouldn't have had an answer. I'd have said, I don't know. I don't understand what the motivation would be. But I did a book that started out to look at the influences of the Air Force Office of Special Investigation on UFO sightings and UFO witnesses in this day and age, when allegedly the Air Force has no interest in it. And it kind of evolved into a book about UFOs in the deep state. And what we see is, and I'm sure you're aware of that as well, the people at the top of the governmental agencies, not necessarily the people in the cabinet, but the bureaucrats, go from administration to administration to administration. It's the same people throughout all of the administrations. And sometimes in the cabinet posts, we see them leaving one administration and showing up in another administration and that sort of thing. And when we look at our history, when a technologically superior civilization makes contact with a more primitive civilization, that primitive civilization ceases to exist in its form. The mere introduction of the technology changes that civilization, radically alters it, and makes that primitive civilization more dependent on the superior technology. And we can look at the Plains Indians, for example. A clay pot is a good thing to cook your dinner in, but an iron pot is much better. And they had no abilities to make the iron pot. And so they had to rely on that. I think Sitting Bull, just prior to the Custer massacre, suggested that after they defeated Custer, leave the battlefield alone, leave the stuff on the battlefield, because he understood that they could not replicate that. They would become dependent on the industrial capabilities of the Americans to repair their weapons, to provide them with ammunition, to do things that they couldn't possibly do. So we've radically altered the civilizations. And I think the people at the top understand that. So it comes down to, if it's announced that there's this alien civilization out there, they've now undermined their own power structure. And with their power comes their financial stability as well. So we end up with a financial motivation and a power motivation. They want to maintain their power. When Jimmy Carter became president, when he was elected president, he went to the director of Central Intelligence, who was George H.W. Bush. And he said, Director Bush, I want to know everything you know about UFOs. And in the discussion, Bush said, well, I'd like to remain as the director of Central Intelligence. And Carter says, I'm bringing in my own guy. And Bush's response was, well, you're not the president yet, you're the president-elect, and you just don't have a need to know, and I'm not going to share the information with you. Nothing that he could do about it, because he wasn't the president yet. He couldn't order Bush to out of his position until later on. I think when you get to the next level of that, if the president asks questions about UFOs, I think they divert his attention. I think what they do is they say, Mr. President, there's a number of agencies involved in this. I'll have to talk to the director of national intelligence and the head of the NSA and maybe the FBI. We'll have to bring all that information together so we can give you a comprehensive report about exactly what's going on. And somehow that report never gets done. It never gets issued. And we saw a perfect example in June of this year when supposedly the director of national intelligence and the Pentagon were responsible for preparing a comprehensive report to Congress to be given to them on June 25th. And what did we get? A C- high school report? Well, we had 144 reports. We don't know how many incidents that is. We just know there were these reports, multiple reports from one incident, just exactly what it was. And there was virtually no information in it. And they said, well, we'll come back to you in 90 days with a more comprehensive report. That would have been October 25th. And nothing was reported. And the news media hasn't talked about it. Nobody's talked about it. So where we are today, they're saying, well, what we're going to do is we've now, in the latest defense budget, we're going to create an office in the Pentagon and the intelligence community to comprehensively look at these things, but we're only going to deal with military sightings, which means now they can issue the blanket of national security and not releasing the information. And we're where we were 75 years ago with the Roswell case, where the same thing was going on.
I do want to get in the level, and I will probably do that after our break, but just to finish this off, because this is very interesting to me, you almost read my mind, because I was going to say, well, if I'm a new president entering into office and I start asking questions about the UFOs, how much am I going to be told? So if you're saying that this is really something that's being kept in the deep state, people change offices. Okay, George Bush Sr. is no longer around. There must be some continuity of knowledge of what's going on of some people in the deep state. Where does that lie? Who would be the people that would, when there's a turnover in personnel and everything else, who has this awareness? If the president can't get it, who can?
I think there's a level of bureaucrats, which is probably under the cabinet level, that maintains all of this sort of thing. And they don't answer questions that aren't asked, which is to say, if you don't ask about UFOs, they're not going to volunteer the information. We had a perfect example of this called Operation Solo, which was there were two guys. Morris Childs was one of them. He was a rabid communist in the 1930s. And as he worked with the Soviet Union, he discovered that communism wasn't maybe the best way to go, or at least the way it was practiced in the Soviet Union. And he turned and became an FBI asset. And he was meeting with the people at the highest levels in the Soviet Politburo. They knew who he was. They gave him all kinds of information and that sort of thing. And he was giving that information to the FBI. But the information was controlled out of the FBI office in New York City. And the president didn't know about this for the most part. The only time they read a president in was when Jerry Ford became president after Nixon had resigned, and there was a meeting coming up with the Soviets. And Ford was concerned about how he would be able to deal with the Soviet Union. And they brought him in and said, this is something that's highly classified. It's run out of this office. Not even our senior level, probably Hoover knew, but nobody else really knew about what was going on. And this was a thing that lasted for literally decades. A wonderful asset. It finally ended when, of course, Morris Childs retired and he passed away, and then all the information came out because there could be no ramp.
Yeah, Kevin, we're gonna have to interrupt at this point. We have to cut for a commercial break. You're listening to Quantum Spirituality on Dream Vision 7 Radio. I'm your host, Peter Canova, author of the 25-time award-winning First Souls Trilogy, which is available on my website, petercanova.com. That's PeterCanova.com. We'll be back in a few minutes. Don't go away with our guest, Colonel Kevin Randle. We'll be right back.
The First Souls Trilogy, one of the most highly awarded fictional independent book series on the market, is a grand vision of human evolution. It chronicles the first spirit consciousness to enter the material world in 3 page-turning novels that introduce a new paradigm of reality based on genuine ancient wisdom and quantum science. These inspirational thrillers will force you to rethink the nature of the world in which we live. Visit the petercanova.com website for information and ordering. In a world facing annihilation, a miraculous African nun rises to become the first female pope through a web of war, murder, and betrayal. Loved by some, hated by many, she becomes the deadly target of Islamic terrorists and her own cardinals as she introduces a new vision that will either save humanity or accelerate its destruction. 4 people must race against a nuclear holocaust to learn her astonishing secret. Pope Annalisa is available at petercanova.com, Amazon, and other online booksellers and bookstores worldwide.
Why are we here? How can we be happy? Questions asked from millennials to boomers. Crappy to happy. Sacred Stories of Transformational Joy answers them using true stories of grit, grace, and love. James Redfield, author of The Celestine Prophecy, wrote in the foreword, "This book is a seminar about emerging truths and offers grounded solutions through the art of the comeback." Dr. Bernie Siegel, a contributing author, wrote, "Bodies die, but spirits and consciousness survive and recycle." So, grab some tissues, open your book, and prepare to cry and laugh till it heals. Crappy to Happy by Reverend Ariel Patricia and Kathleen O'Keefe Canavas. Available from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and booksellers worldwide.
How did life start on Earth, and why is there so much suffering? Are we living in a simulated reality like the characters in the Matrix movie? Do parallel dimensions exist alongside ours, influencing our experience? What are the mysterious dark energies that penetrate our universe? Peter Canova folds space and time to bring the twin bookends of ancient wisdom and quantum science into a single focal point, answering these and many other deep mysteries of the creation. Quantum Spirituality can be heard every Tuesday at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern and 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Pacific on syndicated Dream Vision 7 radio network. See the show where past and present merge to show us our future.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.
Welcome back to Quantum Spirituality on DreamVision7Radio.com. I'm your host, Peter Canova, and you can find out more about me at my website, petercanova.com. And please, if you enjoy the show or you have any questions or comments for me, you can leave them on my Facebook page, Peter Canova Author, also accessible from my website. Today, we're discussing the topic of UFOs with Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Randle. And Kevin, I would like to pick up on a particular incident that you've gone into in depth, which occurred in Levelland, Texas, I believe, in 1957. So, can you kind of tell us what's special about this case?
This was a case where we have multiple independent witnesses talking to the law enforcement agencies in the area with a UFO that was interacting with the environment over a period of about 2.5 hours in the Levelland, Texas area, Levelland being just west of Lubbock, Texas, not all that far from Roswell, by the way. Within an hour or so of it ending in Levelland, there were sightings in the White Sands Missile Range, and over the next couple of days, there were some similar incidents in that area. But the Levelland case kind of magnified this idea of electromagnetic effects. And what happened was, the very first guy to be in the Levelland area, there were some sightings prior to Levelland in the hours prior to it, but the thing that activated the interest here was Pedro Saucedo and his passenger were in a pickup truck just north of Levelland, Texas, and there's glowing blue object landed near them, stalled the truck engine. dimmed the headlights and filled the radio with static. Saucedo was so scared he dived out of the truck and rolled under it for protection. The passengers sat there paralyzed by, I guess, fear. The object then turned into a bright reddish, orangish glow and took off. And once the object took off, they were able to start the pickup truck. I should mention Saucedo was a veteran of the Korean War, so it wasn't like he had not been in some kind of high stress situations in the past. They were so frightened by the whole experience that they didn't go to Levelland. They went to another town close by and called the sheriff in Levelland or the police agencies in Levelland. And of course, the initial reaction was to laugh them off. I mean, what are these guys drinking? That sort of thing. But within a few minutes or so, somebody else called with a similar experience, and then another one and another one, until they had a number of people calling into the sheriff's office that they realized it was either some kind of an extremely elaborate joke or there was something really strange going on. So the sheriff decided he was going to go out and look for it. Sheriff, and I hate the name, it's Ware Clem. And I wish he had a name like Jack Armstrong or something, but he had that name. He led a small convoy, and I say there were 3 cars. It was the sheriff and one of his deputies. Behind them was a car from the Texas State Police, which I know now it's called the Texas Department of Public Safety. I don't know if it was called that in 1957 or not. And behind that, curiously, was a car with Air Force officers in it. So they're out there looking for this thing. The sheriff told reporters the next day that he saw a glowing red object close by within 100 yards, 200 yards of where he was. He had his mechanic, the sheriff's department, the police mechanic, look at his car to see if there was anything wrong with it, which is interesting, which means probably his car was stalled by the thing, as would be the car for the state police in it, as would be the car with the Air Force officers in it, which is information that I was able to uncover in my investigation. But the Air Force sent a NCO, Staff Sergeant Norman Barth from Ent Air Force Base, which is Colorado Springs, down to Levelland. He spent 7 hours investigating it. He talked to 6 witnesses, the sheriff being one of them. And then he disappeared into the woodwork, never to be heard from again in this context. You have to wonder if, and we have the documentation, if the Air Force officers were involved in it, where was the investigation of their experiences? That doesn't show up in the Project Blue Book files, but clearly they would have been interrogated by somebody. We know based on newspaper reports that the next day, the provost marshal at Reese Air Force Base, which is in Lubbock, which is not all that far again from Levelland, worked with the sheriff looking for landing traces. According to the newspapers, they didn't find anything. Don Berliner, a UFO researcher in the 1970s, talked to the sheriff himself. And what he learned from the sheriff was that they saw the glowing object. It wasn't a streak of light in the distance as reported in the Project Blue Book files, but an object that was close enough that they could identify a shape and that sort of thing. So he was able to verify some of the newspaper reports that came out prior to the Air Force showing up. And then, of course, once the Air Force showed up, it became a streak of light in the distance. And now we're back to an object. Don Burlinson, and yes, there's a lot of Dons in the conversation now. He coincidentally lives in Roswell, which is 2.5, 3 hours from Levelland. And he met with the sheriff's widow and the daughter around 2000. And the wife said that the sheriff got close enough that his car stalled. And Burlinson talked to the mechanic and said, yes, the sheriff brought the car in to see if there was anything wrong with it. And you wouldn't have done that had it not stalled at some point, which then suggests the other cars, if they didn't stall, they knew that the sheriff's car stalled and they didn't get, and if they pulled up close, their cars would have stalled as well. And Burlinson found witnesses, I think it's on the north side of Levelland. One of the ranchers there reported a burned area on the ground, a landing trace on the ground. The rancher had passed away, but his daughter had gone out to see the burned area so she could describe. So we have a first-hand witness to the burned area as well. So here's what we have in Levelland now. We have multiple witnesses at multiple locations talking about the same kind of craft and having their car engine stalled and their headlights dimmed and that sort of thing. We have discussion of burned landing traces And we have a great body of testimony showing how the Air Force tried to bury the sighting, tried to make it, dismiss it as not being that important. And in fact, what they had done, and the documents are in the Project Blue Book files, where they were saying, well, we're not going to make a release on this thing until we see what NICAP has to say, NICAP being a civilian research organization based in Washington, D.C. and led by Don Kehoe. That's why I say there are a lot of Dons in this story. But they didn't respond until Kehoe made his announcement, and they said, well, Kehoe was wrong. There weren't 9 witnesses who saw the object. There were only 3. If you read the Project Blue Book files, you can find at least 5. So the Air Force wasn't telling the truth. And I found 13 at 13 separate locations. So that means Kehoe was wrong and he had underestimated it. But they were so busy arguing over the number of witnesses and that sort of thing that the important stuff got lost, like the interaction with the environment. You know, what would cause the cars to stall? You know, is it something that they did on purpose, or it was just a close approach of the UFO?
Yeah, you know, I want to ask you in a second about the electromagnetic effect, but what is there a nexus, Kevin, that you can see? I mean, okay, so you got White Sands, you got Roswell, and you got Levelland, you know, kind of roughly within, you know, sort of the same area. Of course, you know, White Sands, the atomic testing is long gone. I mean, but what is there something about that area around there that would be you know, attract you know, such a concentration of events?
If we go back to 1947, absolutely. Well, we detonated the first atomic bomb there at White Sands, the Trinity site. Now we get to 1947, we're launching rockets into space. We're not doing a real good job of it, but we're launching rockets into space. So if you're an alien species and you've come to Earth and you've seen we've developed atomic weapons, and you see we're now moving into space, that might interest you in how dangerous are we to them getting off the planet Earth? Do we pose a threat to them? Well, obviously we still don't. And I think that's part of the problem. Where is our rocketry going? Where is our atomic research going? And you're looking around that. The only atomic strike force in the world at the time in 1947 was, of course, the 509th Bomb Group at Roswell. You had Los Alamos in the northern part of New Mexico, where there was an awful lot of atomic research going on. So you've got a lot of scientific research going on in that area. Not to mention,
that's interesting. I didn't know that about Roswell. Okay, good. That's a good point.
But and later on, of course, we have expanded our atomic capabilities beyond Roswell. But this is where everything was going on, and where if I was an alien race, I would be interested in looking at it. Okay. And so I think that's kind of the draw to the desert Southwest, and we have a lot of sightings from that area that are very, very interesting. The Socorro sighting, for example, in 1964 with Lonnie Zamora, the police officer who saw it on the ground. Socorro is not that far from the Trinity site where the atomic bomb was exploded. And not far from Socorro is the very large array. I always call it the Whopping Huge Array, which is a radio telescope listening for signals from space, not only natural signals, but of course, the possibility of alien signals and that sort of thing. So you've got an awful lot of that kind of research going on and continuing to go on in that area.
Now, just before the break here, we got a few minutes before the break. Can you tell us about the electromagnetic effect? I mean, you know, I know it causes cars to stall out, lights to go off, but what exactly is the source of this effect? What specifically causes these things, these failures to happen?
I think it's a relative of the electromagnetic pulse. If you detonate an atomic bomb, there's an electromagnetic pulse which is going to fry all your electronics. And I think maybe the propulsion system, and again, I'm speculating wildly here, because if I had the real answer, I'd be really, really rich, and you wouldn't be able to find me to talk to. But the propulsion system may have some sort of an electromagnetic pulse type phenomenon associated with it, which causes the engines to fail and that sort of thing. We know that it's electromagnetic. A fellow named Fred Johnson was a prospector in Washington near Mount Adams within minutes of Kenneth Arnold's sighting in 1947. He reported the objects over him, and his compass began to spin wildly, which suggests, of course, the influence of an electromagnetic force. And there's been a lot of that sort of phenomenon reported as well. I think a fellow named Eric Herr had gathered 144 instances where a close approach of a UFO caused problems with compasses and that sort of thing. That subset of the electromagnetic effect.
Okay, so this effect is not just limited to things like cars. Obviously, it can affect a wider array of our instrumentation.
Yes, it does. In fact, Fran Ridge used that kind of a basis for his MADAR network, which measures a network of sensors monitoring the area around them. One of them they look for is, of course, a magnetic effect, but other sensors pick up other anomalies in the environment, and then they cross-check it with UFO sightings to see if there's some kind of correlation there, and they're doing a wonderful job. They don't have enough nodes yet to do all of that. But yeah, animals will react to it as well. We have in the book on Level Land, I do talk about animals reacting to the close approach of UFOs as well. So it's not only just our instrumentality, a word I love, by the way, instrumentality, but it also can affect animals and that sort of thing. And it's knocked radio stations off the air, it's knocked power grids down. It's done a lot of those sorts of things. So it's a kind of a suppression of the electrical fields that we use to generate all of these things, keep our cars going and that. In Amarillo, Texas, I think it was 10 or 12 hours prior to the Level Land sightings, Amarillo not being that far from Level Land, a couple drove their car into a kind of a fog, and the car died and the UFO took off and disappeared, and they couldn't get their car started again because the battery had been fried. I don't know why the battery.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, is there a point when these craft leave the proximity where the instrumentation makes a recovery?
The headlights would come back on, but with most of the car events, the driver takes an action. He must restart the engine. The Condon Committee, which was the University of Colorado study financed by the Air Force, didn't look at Level Land because they could think of no mechanism in which, where you remove the magnetic field, which they knew could suppress the electron flow in an engine, would cause it to restart spontaneously. But if you read the accounts carefully, what you see is the car started normally, or the driver took an action. I went through this very carefully because I suddenly noticed that this idea that the cars restarted spontaneously wasn't universal. One guy in Level Land said, yes, his car started spontaneously when the electromagnetic field was removed. Almost everybody else said they took some action to restart the car.
Okay.
So that criticism by Condon wasn't an accurate criticism.
Right. We're going to have to pause for another break. Don't go away. I'm your host, Peter Canova, and you're listening to Quantum Spirituality on DreamVision7radio.com. We'll be right back with our guest, Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Randle.
The First Souls Trilogy, one of the most highly awarded fictional independent book series on the market, is a grand vision of human evolution. It chronicles the first spirit consciousness to enter the material world in 3 page-turning novels that introduce a new paradigm of reality based on genuine ancient wisdom and quantum science. These inspirational thrillers will force you to rethink the nature of the world in which we live. Visit the petercanova.com website for information and ordering. In a world facing annihilation, a miraculous African nun rises to become the first female pope through a web of war, murder, and betrayal. Loved by some, hated by many, she becomes the deadly target of Islamic terrorists and her own cardinals as she introduces a new vision that will either save humanity or accelerate its destruction. 4 people must race against a nuclear holocaust to learn her astonishing secret. Pope Annalisa is available at petercanova.com, Amazon, and other online booksellers and bookstores worldwide.
What if dreams can diagnose your life? What if we can meet the love of our life in dreams? Join host Kat O'Keefe Canovis, the #1 internationally best-selling author of Dreams That Can Save Your Life, written with Duke University medical doctor Larry Burke. Dreaming Healing is where we'll explore dreams, research, and interpret dreams from you, the caller. Dreaming Healing shows can be heard every Tuesday at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern, with live shows on the first and third evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific Time on syndicated Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. Come live your dreams out loud with Kat.
How did life start on Earth, and why is there so much suffering? Are we living in a simulated reality like the characters in the Matrix movie? Do parallel dimensions exist alongside ours, influencing our experience? What are the mysterious dark energies that penetrate our universe? Peter Canova folds space and time to bring the twin bookends of ancient wisdom and quantum science into a single focal point, answering these and many other deep mysteries of the creation. Quantum Spirituality can be heard every Tuesday at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern and 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Pacific on syndicated Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. See the show where past and present merge to show us our future.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.
Welcome back to the last segment of our Quantum Spirituality show on syndicated DreamVision7Radio.com. I'm your host, Peter Canova. You can watch the show online, on your phone, in cars with Bluetooth, and through Amazon's Echo by asking Alexa, play Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. If you have any questions or comments on today's show, you can leave it on my website, petercanova.com, where you can also link to my Facebook page to comment. We're going to continue our discussion with about UFOs with Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Randle. And Kevin, I just want to finish up on what we talked about on the electromagnetic fields. We've described what it does to electronics. Is there any known effect or residual effect that it actually has on the human body in the form of radiation, or even if it's not the EMF effect, do people who have had these close encounters, is there any radioactive, let's say, effect on their body that has been detected?
When we move away from Levelland, yeah, there are. James Stokes, who reported a close approach of a UFO in the days following Levelland over near Old Grande, New Mexico, which is just south of Alamogordo, had a light sunburn type on his face, part of his face and one of his arms, after he had seen a UFO. Think of Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when he shows up home and half of his face has been sunburned and that sort of thing. But it faded quickly. There are cases of people being badly burned in close approaches of UFOs. And I'm thinking of the Cash Landrum case, but this doesn't relate to the Roswell case. And they seem to have health issues that continued on for the rest of their lives. And it seemed that the symptoms that they originally reported were types of radiation sickness, which is something different than the electromagnetic effects. So yeah, there are people who have reported some kind of physical ailment associated with this. Oftentimes it fades quickly and there's no residual effects, but there are some people who have had lingering effects from close approaches of UFOs. Okay.
Now, sort of tying up the Levelland incident, what at the end of the day, what was the official Air Force response? What explanation did they put forth for the sightings? And then I think there was also some involvement of a study from the University of Colorado, but let's talk first about the Air Force. What was their official explanation of the Levelland incident?
I want to make one thing clear. When we're talking about Levelland, we have an awful lot of people involved from an awful lot of different locations independently reporting this phenomenon. And it took place over a period of 2 to 2.5 hours. All those facts are important in determining this. The Air Force decided it was ball lightning. Ball lightning, as I said, is very short-lived. It's not very big. There's no cases I know of where it's caused a car to fail or the headlights to dim or anything like that. But if you go to the Air Force Project Blue Book, as they're on the web now, the internet, you can look up the level land sightings, and on the project card, it says the explanation is ball lightning.
Could you tell us a little bit? I mean, I'm familiar with fork lightning, but I never heard of ball lightning before. Can you tell our audience what ball lightning is? It's
a little glowing ball of what they call lightning. You can see it rolling down the road, or it just, it just sort of appears. I think there was a case where they claimed it leaped into the window of a house, and then it just sort of pops and goes out. It's kind of a earthquake light type thing. In the book, there's a picture of alleged ball lightning, but I'm not sure exactly how good
So it's something that occurs in nature, but it doesn't occur that often.
It's extremely rare, and it's associated with lightning strikes and that sort of thing. You don't see it very often, and it's very short-lived. That's the important part. It's short-lived and it's very small. And when we get to level land, we're talking about events over a large area, over a long period of time, by multiple people seeing the thing, describing something that's much too large for it. Ball lightning lasts seconds. Mm-hmm. And in one of the cases in level land, the witness reported his car was stalled for at least 10 minutes before he could get it started again, after the object left. So he had a very good chance to see it, but it was there much too long. So ball lightning is not an explanation for it. They offered a number of other explanations. Well, it was drizzly that night and the clouds were low, but we've got a weather report that ironically came from Roswell, as I said, wasn't that far away, saying that there was about a 4/10 cloud cover in the area, and the rain that had been in the area had passed through in the early afternoon. So it wasn't drizzly, it wasn't raining. The sky was not obscured, as they said. So everything the Air Force said about the environmental conditions that night are simply wrong. So
it sounds like a series of lame excuses from the Air Force. But didn't the University of Colorado somehow get involved in this?
The University of Colorado got a contract from the Air Force originally for $500,000. They added another $50,000 later to do an investigation, a scientific investigation of UFOs. There's a letter, and it's on my blog, actually. It's called the Hippler letter. You type Hippler into my blog, and it'll bring up the letter, and it's from an Air Force officer telling Condon, here's what we'd like you to find. We'd like you to find out there's no national security implications. We'd like you to say some positive things about the Air Force investigation, and we'd like you to conclude that there's nothing of scientific value that can be learned from continued investigation. When they got done with the investigation, that's exactly what they concluded. So, I mean, what I'm saying is a put-up job. Level land appears in their documents one time, and it mentions the sightings there. They said, but there's nothing we could do about it. So we looked at some cases that took place during our investigation. I think there were 2 of them, and they're listed in the book and describing what happened there. But they didn't deal with the level land at all. They ignored it completely. One of the things they did do, however, they contacted some engineers at Ford, and they came up with what they call a magnetic mapping, so that if you placed a compass on your car hood and the top and the trunk, and recorded the readings on the compass. Now you've got a magnetic map of the car. Now, if it's exposed to an extreme magnetic field, that magnetic mapping should change. And if you magnetically mapped it again, then you would see the variation. But they said, well, we couldn't do that in level land because it was 10 years ago. We don't know if we could find the cars. And they may be right about that. But any cars made in the same plant around the same time should have a magnetic map that pretty well matches all the other cars. There would be slight deviations, but if your car is exposed to a magnetic field, it would radically alter it.
Right. There's a couple of things as we're winding down here. I really love to get your input on a couple of things that puzzle me. Several things that puzzle me. Okay, and I guess I can divide it up into 3 phenomena: crop circles, cattle mutilations, and human abductions. Okay. And here's what puzzles me about this. Number one, crop circles. Why on earth would an advanced species engage in doing something as stupid as crop circles. Second thing is cattle mutilations. It seems kind of malevolent. I don't really get it, what that would be about. And the third thing is, actual close encounters, abductions. Now, I've heard stories that range from things that sound kind of malevolent, experimentations, probings, and things like that, to other things that are more benign. Could you tackle those three subjects and tell us what your take is on that?
If you want me to commit ufological suicide, I'll be glad to. Which means I do not embrace these phenomena the way many in the field do. Crop circles, I think that's the majority of those are hoaxes. I just don't think they're a way of communicating with us by the aliens, and I don't know why they would do it basically in England and very, very limited areas around the world. There are what's called saucer nests, and that would be UFO landing in a grassy area or something like that, and the sheer weight of the craft itself creates a depression in the crops, but that's really not a crop circle in the classic sense of these elaborate displays, which, by the way, are absolutely gorgeous. But I don't think it has anything to do with UFOs. Cattle mutilations is the same thing. I don't believe it has anything to do with UFOs at all. I think that you take a look, an unbiased look, a dispassionate look at the evidence for that, and you can see where the problems are, that it's probably misidentifications of predator damage and scavenger damage to the animals. Then they began talking about upside mutilations and not the underside mutilations. You say, well, that's because a cow fell down and the predators couldn't get under it, and they attacked the soft tissues, which you'd expect them to attack because that's the soft tissues. There was one, they had a picture in one of the books I saw of a dead cow, and they said there's no sign of footprints around the animal for the predators to have left in the soft mud. And I said, yeah, because they were birds. How do I know where the birds? Because they left their debris behind. They, you know how birds are. They leave little white gifts all over the place. And you could see that on the animal. You knew that it wasn't a furry friend, it was a bird. So I think the cattle mutilations, I don't think have anything to do with UFOs. I think it's just a misinterpretation of the evidence.
Okay, and how about the human abductions, or the alleged human abductions?
I look at it from the point of view, I can see where some of them make sort of sense, and I'm thinking like Travis Walton or Barney and Betty Hill. It's kind of a target of opportunity, gathering genetic material. But these longitudinal studies that they talk about, I just don't believe are going on. I think it's a manipulation by the operators, meaning the hypnotists and the people gathering the data, are overlooking some clues in the transcripts. Bud Hopkins at one point challenged a bunch of us. It was, show me in my interviews where I led the witness. And I said, challenge accepted, and quoted from his own transcripts where you can see he's leading the witness to a specific point. Bud Hopkins always got the cold, calculating, scientific aliens. David Jacobs got the creatures creating hybrids for taking over the earth. John Mack always got the aliens with a Western philosophy. Okay. And it's you can see it's all related to the philosophy of the people conducting the investigations, as opposed to I think good, accurate investigation. Okay,
we've got about 2 minutes left, and there's one question that is really always on my mind, and that is the potential origin of these UFOs. Now, Jacques Vallée, very famous ufologist, feels that rather than extraterrestrial, they're interdimensional. Personally, I tend to gravitate towards that. Well, you know, if our show here is quantum spirituality, deals with the whole question of parallel dimensions under quantum theory and under ancient spiritual traditions. It's one of the amazing coincidences between science and mysticism is the description of these alternate, energetic dimensions separated by vibrational energy. We spoke not long ago with another British UFO researcher who also tends towards this belief of the origins. And he had a very interesting point. He said, the way that these objects move, where it defies our laws of physics, he said it's almost as if they were interdimensional craft that bring a bubble of their own dimension with them and operate within that bubble to defy the physical laws of our own particular dimension. Do you have any take on this, please?
My philosophy is it's extraterrestrial. I think that's probably where
we've come to the end of our show. And thank you for appearing, Kevin. We appreciate it. It was very informative. And a big thanks to our producer, Bob. Please join me again. The new shows starting the first Tuesday of every month. And this show will be archived on my Dream Vision 7 page, which is accessible from my website, petercanova.com. And until the next time, remember, Quantum Spirituality is the show where the past and present, where mysticism and science merge to show us our future. See you next time.
This ends today's segment of Quantum Spirituality, the show where the past and present merge to show us our future. Join us the first Tuesday of each month for cutting-edge information and informative new episodes. This show will be archived on the Quantum Spirituality Dream Vision 7 Radio Network website page, also accessible at petercanova.com. That's petercanova.com.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.